The following program sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts.
About money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth, and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared on the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
Welcome to the program, and we're going to be talking about money. You know, when I got my first computer back in 1986 and set it up, I had a word processing, I had a spreadsheet, and I had a database program. And I looked at that and I thought, I've arrived. What else can you add in software to this? And I read an article in the paper that said there were 700 companies in Seattle that were doing software development. And I thought, huh? Why? I didn't understand that at all. Today there's 8,000, and I really know now what those 700 companies are working on, or at least some of those 700 companies. And we've seen an explosion in software. But later in the program, you're going to hear from my guest today, who most of those people in the tech industry still don't completely understand his business and his technology and where it's going. And yet it's going to be one of the great technologies of the 21st century. That's coming later in the program, so you want to hear what he has to say. Secondly, I want to talk about zombies. Zombies? Yeah, zombies and investments. That's coming later in the program too. So you want to stick around. We've got a lot to talk about today. You know, the weather's been really hazy. The weather was so bad the first couple of days of the haze that I had a sore throat. My administrative manager had a headache. Other people had headaches, sinus fevers, all those things happening. The haze in Seattle. And yet we had the wettest winter in Seattle history. And now we've had the longest period of time without rain. Set the record yesterday. Today is another new record of having no rain. So, you know, with all that going on, and with the withdrawal from the Paris Accord affecting climate change, I thought, and I've been talking for a number of months about addressing this whole issue of climate change and the impact. There was a book that was written not too long ago by Friedman and Mandelbaum called That Used to Be Us. And I think it fairly spelled out the issue of climate change and energy. Those two go together. They're not independent of one another. How do we manage the rising need for energy at the same time take care of climate change? That's the real issue. And you know what? My notes just went crazy. So anyway, that happens sometimes. See if I can get them together. Got it back together. Here we go. So energy. I want to first talk about what's driving this whole concept about, and so important about, climate change, and yet it's something that's completely necessary. And that's energy. There was a book written by George Easterbrook called The Sonic Boom. It came out maybe 6 or 7 years ago that talked about what was going on with energy. And when you think about it, when you think about where we are, as our affluence increases, our energy use grows. We have a TV, we have a car, we have kitchen appliances. Businesses need extra energy. And while the energy per capita actually in the U.S. has been decreasing, the number of the population is increasing, which means that our total energy is indeed increasing. But if you look at it in the world in general, as the world has been moving to a greater growth, and I've talked any number of times about the super cycle, when it's the emerging nations that are giving a higher than average GDP to world growth. When you look at what's happening in the rest of the world is consuming and demanding a lot of energy. You know, if you look at China alone, China now uses 23% of the world's energy. U.S. was using just 17% of the world's energy. 23%, 40% between the two countries, 23%. If you look back just to 2007, that ratio was reversed. We were using 23%, China was using 17%. China's growth, because they have a greater population, because they're not as mechanized as we are, their energy consumption is growing much faster. Their energy usage worldwide by 2035 is expected to increase by 30%. China, their energy consumption will begin to slow down and will increase at about 33%, a little higher than the world average. But it's the emerging nations, those smaller nations, that are going to be catching up, and they're requiring more and more energy. And so when you look at where energy is coming from, the coal, the oil, natural gas, all those things burn and they burn for energy, they release energy, but they also release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which adds to global warming. I usually give an example of what CO2, greenhouse gases, are. You know, it's like when you drive to the store. You get in your car, you drive to the store, you've got the air conditioning on, it's 80 degrees outside or 85 degrees today, these last few days, but you've got the air conditioning, your car's at 70 degrees. You get to the grocery store or to the hardware store, whatever store you're going to, you get into the parking lot, you turn off the car, you close down, you close the windows, go into the store, you shop for an hour, maybe 2 hours, you come out, and your car is not the same temperature as the external environment. If it's 80 degrees outside, inside your car, it's 90 or 95. When you open the doors, you can feel the rush of heat hit you. You know, you'll roll down the windows and you'll wait for everything to cool out. You know, you're cooling your car down from 95 to 80 just so you can get in, roll up the windows, and turn on the air conditioning and get it back to 70 degrees. That's the impact of greenhouse gases. Because what happened in your car is the sun is shining down on it, but because you have a limited number of window space, that heat is not coming equally out of the car as it went into the car. So you have the sunlight coming down, that energy pouring into the car, but a lesser amount coming out. And that that energy is heat energy. That's what's happening with greenhouse gases. We have the atmosphere with CO2, it's hanging up in the atmosphere, and it's causing the sun rays, which come down, they bounce off the earth. Those ultraviolet rays bounce off the earth, back out into space. But with greenhouse gases, that's not happening. Or to a lesser extent, it is happening far less. You know, that's what this is all about. And when you're burning coal, when you're burning oil, when you're burning those kind of fuels, we're adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. When we're adding clean energy, wind and solar, that is actually consuming energy. That's a positive in my opinion, but it's going to take a long time or some years before we really see the impact of that. We'll see the impact, and we are seeing the impact, and there'll be more and more we see. We're seeing conservation. I mentioned when you think about all the electronic appliances we're seeing, all the electronic gadgets, the computers, the phones, all the things that we have today, and yet, you know, electrical consumption in the U.S. is only growing 1% per year. We're becoming much more efficient in the electrical devices that we're using, far, far more efficient. That's the one side of the equation. But the other side is, how are we going to deal with climate change? Because it is having an impact. Even with what we have now, if we were to cut off all the greenhouse gases, we would still continue to see warming this entire century and into the next. We're going to see frost-free seasons and growing seasons lengthen. But we're also going to see more droughts and more heat waves. We're going to see changes in the precipitation patterns. We're going to see stronger hurricane patterns and more intense. We're going to see sea levels that will rise somewhere between 1 and 4 feet by 2100, by 2100. The Arctic could become ice-free. In King County alone, up until this year, there were 1 out of 3 years that we had a day that was 95 degrees. That was the average. Once every 3 years, we would have a 95-degree day. The prediction is that by 2080 and 90, if we actually take climate change action, even with what we've done so far, we'll see 2.5 to 8 95-degree days. And if we don't do anything, we'll see 6 to 26 days of 95 degrees. And we have a 1 in 20 chance of having 39 days of 95 degrees. We're beginning to sound like Southern California. That's where we are. But it's not all a bad situation, and there's investment opportunities. Don't go away. We're going to come back, and I'm going to talk about some of that.
Did you know the 20-year annualized S&P return was 8.19%, while the 20-year annualized return for the average equity mutual fund investor was just 4.67%? That's a gap of 3.52%. It doesn't sound like much now, but it could mean the difference between retiring in comfort and running out of money. For some seniors, a gap that large could cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars and cut their retirement short. Don't run out of money. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today, 206-903-1019, and learn more about how you can, 1, create wealth for retirement, and 2, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
We're back with more about money. For details on what you hear on today's show, visit adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Now, here again is Mike Adams.
So I've been talking about energy, the requirements and the demands and the growth for energy. Conversely, the need for dealing with the environment. In some ways, they're opposite views. We need more energy. We're going to need more energy. But we also need to deal with the climate. If you go back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when we first began to use coal and oil and natural gas for industry, the CO2 concentration at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution was 280 parts per million. Not a huge amount. Now, in 2011, it had grown to 390, and it's approaching 400 right now. There's no dispute about that. How do we know back what it was in the Industrial Revolution? When I started my career, I was living in Bellingham, working for Intalco Aluminum. And one of my friends was a professor at Western. And he used to go every year. They used to take this thing and go up or send up a satellite and measure the ozone in the atmosphere. But he also used to go to the Arctic and drill into the ice caps. And I never understood. They would drill down 20 or 30 feet, and he'd take measurements, and I never understood exactly what they were finding. But they were able to calibrate and say, this is the amount of carbon dioxide that was captured in the ice flow at this certain time, because the ice will tend to melt and refreeze, and it builds up over time. So you can tell what the atmospheric concentration was of CO2, 280 parts per million. Today we're at 400. And that is trapping the rays of the sun. You know, between 1880 and 1970, the average temperature increased about 1 degree Fahrenheit. Over those 190 years, 1 degree Fahrenheit. From 1970 to 2014, it increased another degree in 40 years. In the past, since 1998 to the current time, we've had the hottest temperatures measured in our history since we've been measuring temperatures. 2016 was the hottest year on record. And it replaced 2015, which prior to 2016 had been the hottest year on record. And 2015 replaced 2014 that had been the hottest year on record. Global temperature is warming and it's accelerating, and it's having the impact of melting the ice and the ice poles. It's having an impact on the fossil forests that we're reading about in the paper on the East Coast, on the Atlantic coast. We're seeing that in Europe. We're having a dramatic effect on climate change. And yet, there's reason for optimism, there's reason for investment, because over the next 30 years, we're going to spend $45 trillion on energy innovation, on climate change. That's coming, and that provides investment opportunities. If you compare the energy field to all of media, which includes television, radio, newspapers, magazines, entertainment, movies, all that, energy consumes $7 trillion a year. The entire media industry, $1 trillion a year. 7 times larger. It's a huge potential market. You know, it was only a few years ago that people wondered if clean energy was ever going to survive without lavish government support, without all those subsidies. Could clean energy survive if you didn't have all those subsidies? Now, not only do we know it is going to survive, it's a question of how far it's going to spread. If you look at electric vehicles, in 2015, for the first time ever, they sold 1 million cars, electric vehicles, in 2015. Last year, 2 million vehicles. We already know that Volvo's announced in the next few years they'll do a switch to 100% electric vehicles. And Ford announced by 2020, 50% of all the cars they sell will be electric. 13 different models. You know, we know that the Chinese province of Qinghai spent 7 consecutive days running solely on renewable energy. Germany, 35% of their power now comes from wind and solar and hydro. California has set the standard at they want 60% renewable energy by the year 2030. And 176 countries, part of the Paris Accord, have clean energy goals. Hawaii, which is the most oil-dependent state in the United States, has set about to be 100% renewable by the year 2050. And 48 of the poorest countries that are vulnerable to climate change have also targeted 100% renewable by the year 2050. You know, any number of U.S. corporations have committed to clean energy. You see the companies with the huge server farms, the Amazons, the Microsofts, they are committed to running clean energy. And one of the most interesting things is there's a coal mining company in Kentucky which is switching to solar energy. It's going to be the biggest solar field in the state of Kentucky. Those are investment opportunities. That's the future. Looking to coal miners and keeping the coal mining industry going, that's the past. And yes, we'll continue to have coal for a number of years, but that's looking backward. if you're going to make money in this whole area, it's by looking forward, not backward. Which, looking forward, brings me to the guest today, because the idea of this program is to give you insight and understanding of different industries so that you can be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. I heard about a conference that wasn't that many years ago, a couple years ago, where there were 1,000 tech people that were at the conference. And out of those 1,000 tech people, they asked people how many understood virtual reality. And 6 hands went up. Well, it is the coming technology. And my guest today is here, the founder of My3DPad, Jeff Rayner. Welcome to the program, Jeff.
Hi there, Mike. Pleasure to be here.
So why don't we start with your background?
Sure thing. So as you can probably tell, I'm not natively from West Seattle. I actually grew up in southeast of England and moved over to France for a couple of years, and then moved back to the north of England, where I was studying actually in both of those countries, doing astrophysics of all things. Europe's not necessarily well known for the space agency, although that's changing.
It is.
And when I finished my degree there, I realized, where's the future? Astrophysics may well be there, but it's definitely not happening right for me. So went into the consulting background at a startup. Got my kind of first taste of what startup life was like there. And then ever since, I've just been rolling from essentially one startup to the next. And this is now I moved to Seattle 11 years ago. I was planning to be here for 2 years and ended up being here 11. Absolutely love, of all the places I've lived in the world, this is by far my favorite. And definitely the startup culture is unbelievable here.
It is really unbelievable. So why don't you let's talk about My3DPad.
Yep, sure. So what we do, and it relates a little bit to what you were saying there, right, is that if you're not looking forwards, you're essentially moving backwards.
Yes.
With today's technology, the way it stands, it's evolving at such an incredible pace. It really is. People often think of me as an expert in this field, and I always say, no. I'm an expert today, maybe, and even that maybe is pretty loose, but give it 6 months, 12 months, the technology will have evolved so fast. If you don't keep your finger on this pulse, you're definitely going to be falling behind. There is no such thing as riding the wave and sitting back, as it were. What we offer is definitely related to what you were talking about a moment ago. What is the problem? Why don't people realize what's going on with this global warming? And I think people hear about it. They'll see a little bit about it, but typically speaking, they're not experiencing it. Sure, they're seeing this heat wave around Seattle, and they're probably enjoying that somewhat, right? It's a change. But when it starts to get always that way, when their grass is never as green as it once was, they're going to start to feel that. Now, one of the things that virtual reality and augmented reality, and a little bit of mixed reality too, certainly, is that it transports you, it teleports you into a place that you may not be familiar with. You can be there and you can actually experience it, whether it's an architectural world, whether it's a different place in our world, or maybe it's going to Mars. All of those worlds are at your fingertips now.
So you started working with MoHi. Why don't you explain a little bit? And we're going to have just a couple minutes, and then we're going to be commercial break. But let's start with MoHi, and we'll continue after the break.
So we've actually been doing work with several museums around. And the key thing there is basically giving museums the ability to have people visit who don't live in that direct vicinity. The problem is your capture area is very small, typically, and yet if you're disabled, it's hard for you to get in there. If you live far away or you're poor, it's hard to get in there. With the likes of virtual reality, we can recreate the entire museums, and so people from anywhere in the world can come visit. Not only that, when they're there or when they're remote, their experiences are that much more enhanced. It's infotainment, as it were. You can learn so much more than the little plaques that are typically accompany these exhibits offer you.
So, I can remember we used to go to the library when we were doing a research project, and You looked at the card catalog, you looked at books, you checked out magazines or periodicals. Today, if you want to do that, you can. If you have something you want to see at the British Museum, you can log on to the internet. Keep that in mind. We're coming to the commercial break. We'll be right back after the commercial break to talk more about my 3D pad.
More About Money coming up with Mike Adams on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Now we return to About Money. There's more information waiting for you at adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here again is your host, Mike Adams.
So I'm here with Jeff Rayner, and I want to correct something I said. I said doing exhibits at MoHi. It's MoPop, not MoHi, although maybe it'll be MoHi soon. Anyway, back to what we were saying. Jeff, talk to me about what you're doing with the exhibits.
Yeah, so imagine walking up to an exhibit in a museum where typically there is a little plaque, right? And it'll tell you just the most basic information typically. If you ever see a kid looking at something, they look at the world completely differently to how we do. And they have this thirst for knowledge, which we probably do too. It's kind of, we're just living in an older world whereby there was nothing at our fingertips. Now with the power of the phones connected to the internet 24/7 and everybody supplying information to that internet, it means you can look, instead of just looking at one of these pictures or these paintings or these sculptures, you can now interact with it. So a sculpture could come to life. It could talk to you. It can tell you about what's going on. You can, we actually made a fun one where we had a painting of a Van Gogh and a painting of a Da Vinci, and you could take an object out of one of the paintings and replace it in the other painting. So you could improve on the art, just temporarily. No damage to the real art, of course. But it's this level of experience that it's completely surpassed by anything we've historically known. It used to be you'd go to these museums, you'd see a painting, you go, well, that's interesting, and you'd try and perhaps find a curator around who could help you out and learn more about it. Or you'd go home, and then you'd go to the library and you'd look something up. Currently, people go home and look it up on their internet. But what we're providing is in a service that right there and then you'll be able to use something called AR, augmented reality, where you can essentially hold your phone to that picture and the thing will come to life. It'll tell you, you can even ask it questions. It'll tell you information. You'll be able to look at additional art by that person, find out where it is. Essentially, it's bringing those things that are your fingertips today, but you just have to do some research, just make it that much easier.
That's pretty amazing, and you're doing this for MoPop, you're doing it for a museum in San Diego. And it's bringing things truly to life, you know.
Yep.
We were at the Terracotta Warriors. And if you think about what could happen there, where the Terracotta Warrior actually comes to life and tells you about the battles, tells you about what was going on.
Yep.
It takes it beyond imagination. It takes it to a reality, understanding of what was going on.
One of the things that we could obviously do with the likes of museums and galleries is put the curator or even the painter right at your fingertips too, so you could have that person telling you about what it is you're looking at. But the same thing goes for architecture too. When you're looking around a famous building or a really nice home that you're looking at buying, you could have essentially a personal curator that's taking you on a guide around that place, highlighting the key things that you might care about, or similarly the things that might change. If it's a brand new home, you can click on the flooring and see the options that exist. You could change the walls. You could, all these things that are typically in these little two-dimensional imageries, you just have no idea what it really means. Now you can actually see it and experience it, and see it real-time change in front of you as if you're really there. The funny thing is, we give these presentations whereby we don't sell our solutions, right? And we go across multiple markets and domains. But what we like to do is give you the experience and let you actually understand it, because when you step into one of these worlds, it blows your socks off. It's such a unique experience. And when you've tried it, there's no looking back. It's one of those times when you remember the rest of your life. Do you remember when that happened? We are just on the verge of doing a new promotion right now where we say, what was the last wave to really come through and hit us all? And it was probably the recession, right? But there's nothing really influential since then. But maybe this VR and this AR is the next wave, and it's going to be a positive one because it's going to influence our lives in a very positive and informational way, but also in an educational entertainment way too, which I think is really what brings it all together.
And you know, I've gone through the VR experience with a part and twisting it around and turning it around, looking at it in all the dimensions and seeing how it's put together. And I have a client who's an architect who looks, and they use virtual reality for a house because it's not just drawing it out. They get to actually see what it looks like and feel and touch. And, you know, they can say, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Let's move this over here. Let's change this. And it's not just an imagination thing. It's as if you're really there.
Yeah.
The virtual reality fools your brain into believing that you're there.
So we do a common test. If someone's not really experienced it before, we ask them if anybody's scared of heights. And if there's someone who's afraid of heights, we pick on them. And we bring them over and we stick them into what we did with one of our earlier architectural partners. And we take them up to the 30th floor, take them in an elevator, they go up to the 30th floor, and they walk out around and they interact with the office as if they're designing it themselves to get it to their liking. And then we ask them to look out the window. And they go to the window and we say, you can step out on the window. And so we open a door. Now, the first thing they always do, which is hilarious, is they step over the window ledge, right? Of course, it's not really there, so they can just keep walking, but they can't. They are so sure it's there that they'll step over it. And then there's a little ledge on the edge. And we say, look, try and balance along the edge. This is completely imaginary. This is completely in this virtual world, but they will so heavily edge along. And if they look down, you'll always hear them scream. It's guaranteed within about 15 seconds, you forget what the real world is, and you are in this completely new environment. And as technology improves, it's becoming now available on our phones, on our iPads, and in the very near future, it's essentially going to be something that's built into all of our devices.
It's one of the new technologies, which is just at the very, very beginning.
Yeah.
There's going to be tremendous investment opportunities in all this stuff. It's going to be it's going to be revolutionary.
Yeah, as you've probably heard in the news, or some people may have heard, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, has been recently really announcing that they're going to try and lead the way in AR. What that means, typical Apple fashion, no one knows for sure. But we know Apple are hugely invested in this. They've just come out with this new solution called the AR Kit with the rollout of iOS 11. So everybody who's got an iPad or an iPhone will see this update come on to their devices. And this will enable their devices to natively use this new technology, which is crucial to adoption too. It's one thing for companies like ours to create these wonderful solutions, but it's somewhat annoying to always have to download a little app to make it work. There's two areas that we would love to see. The first step towards that is making it native in the browser. So whenever you're looking at something on your device, you can instantly just hold it up and it will instantly work with some of these things once you're in that browser. But the second stage is really to be able to utilize this technology completely natively on your device. As if you're just taking a picture, for example, there'd just be an additional option that would just say, use AR. But, from the camera, you slide, you see still shots, you see video, and there should be an AR option there too. Then once it gets to that point, I think the adoption rates will just go through the roof.
So I want to close by talking about the difference between and defining virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, because I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of people that don't agree on what they are.
Absolutely, yeah. And to be completely honest, there is no exact definition of those things. They are terms that certain industry leaders are pushing, Microsoft, for example, is pushing more on the mixed reality side. Apple is using the term augmented reality. But there's no one that categorically defines what they are. I like to look at it as a spectrum. If we take virtual reality, for example, on one end of that spectrum, you have the real world, right? There's nothing fake about it. I look through, I see everything, I understand it. If you can imagine doing completely the opposite, whereby we create every single part of the world in a computer, think of it like the Matrix, as it were. So that is complete virtual reality. Using the Matrix as an example, if you then plug into that world, we do it today by a headset, right? So we know it's a virtual world. But if we plugged in and or someone put this headset on while we were sleeping and you wake up, is that real? Is it virtual?
For those who don't understand, The Matrix was a movie. A virtual reality movie.
Yeah, yes, indeed.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah, and then you've got AR. So AR, if you put essentially the VR spectrum on one degree of an axis, and then you put AR going upwards from there, if you take your camera or your phone and you hold it up and you show an object and it pulls up a little bit of information about it, that's kind of what I like to think of the first level of augmented reality. It tells you information about something. So the only thing that's popping up is a little bit of information. It could be your favorite sports character that it recognizes and tells you about. It could be a bottle of wine. The next level is to superimpose into that world some CGI, some computer-generated imagery. So that could be, okay, you've got your sports person there, and it could be some advertisement perhaps around him, or it could be some information or additional videos and things that are there. Then you got that extra level, which is when you put this CGI in there that is so realistic that you can't tell any longer whether it's really there or not. You have to pull your device down to assess it. And we are really close to that right now. So when people worry about the VR and AR terms, I almost say don't worry, because within 5 years, there'll probably be a completely new term. It will just be an alternate reality.
Yeah. It's really the cutting edge of technology. One of the real cutting edges, one of the real changes that's coming. It's just at the beginning. It's where word processing, where spreadsheets were in 1985. Today, we're just at the very beginning of this. So thank you for being on the program and explaining it.
Absolutely.
Hopefully people got a better idea of where we're going. It's a whole new field, and it's going to be explosive. Anyway, don't go away. We're going to come back and talk about zombies. So don't go away. I'll be right back.
Stay tuned. About Money returns in a moment with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
How do you picture retirement? House on the beach, small farm in the country, traveling the world with your spouse. The one thing you don't picture is running out of money. Retirement dreams are shattered all too often by poor investment choices, sending many retirees back to work. If you think the job market is tough now, try entering it after you've retired. Don't run out of money. Start planning now. Call Mike Adams of Adams Financial Concepts today at 206-903-1019 and learn more about how you can create wealth for retirement and, probably most importantly, protect yourself from running out of money. Adams Financial Concepts specializes in creating and maintaining wealth. Call today, 206-903-1019, or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
About Money continues. Remember the website adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
So I mentioned zombies a couple times. We're going to get there. But before we get to the zombies, I got to take you back to 1878. Young man, 24 years old, George Eastman. He was a clerk at Rochester Savings Bank, and he was going to take a vacation to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And he wanted to record the trip. And so he was going to take a camera. Took this huge camera, a huge tripod. To take that, you needed a jug of water, you needed heavy plates, you needed heavy plate holders, you need glass tanks and chemicals and a large tent to develop these these pictures, it was a wet process. Well, by the time he collected all that information, he never did go on the trip, but he wanted and realized there could be a more portable solution, and he began to develop it. In his kitchen, he developed a dry process. Took him 2 years, and he formed the Eastman Dry Plate Company. That was in 1878. It took him 2 years to 1880. By 1884, he was actually not just making a dry plate, he was making a roll of film. And by 4 years later, he had developed a camera that could take a roll of film. You just press the button and we do the rest. That was the slogan. That's how they sold the camera. It was the Eastman, and he changed the name to the Eastman Company. He wanted to catch your name. And one of his favorite letters was K. One of his favorite letters was K. And so in 1892, he formed the Eastman Kodak Company. Now, there's never been a Kodak. It was just that he wanted the name Kodak. So it became the Eastman Kodak Company. And his view in 1892 was he was really a chemical supply and dry goods purveyor. But he soon realized he was making photography an everyday affair. He was making it as convenient as a pencil. That became the slogan. And for the next 100 years, Eastman Kodak did exactly that. They made taking pictures an everyday affair. Now you fast forward to 1973, and there was a young engineer graduate from RPI who got an engineering job at Kodak, and his boss asked him for a very small request. His boss had heard about Fairchild Semiconductor investing in a charge-coupled device, a CCD, a charge-coupled device. And it was an easy way to move an electronic charge around a transistor. Transistors were new in those days. They were very big at the time. And he wanted to know if these devices could be made for imaging. So Sasson, this young engineer, used CCDs to make the first digital still camera and a digital recording device. You know, in the 70s, Polaroid had crossed their camera with Speak and Spell. But it looked like that Speak and Spell, that big Polaroid camera. It was the size of a toaster. It weighed 8.5 pounds. And it wasn't very clear. 30 black and white signals were what created the image, and it was stored on a cassette tape. It was really crude. But what it was the first digital camera. And it was the Kodak Company that made that. So now fast forward to 1996, Kodak Company had 140,000 employees. They had a $28 billion market cap. Effectively, they had a monopoly in the film market. They had 90% of all the film that was sold in the world and 85% of every camera, the entire camera market. And they viewed their business as the photographic business. Instead of understanding a desire to record our lives and capture the moment and record those key events and times, they saw their business as the photographic business. What they saw was the film business and the money they were making there. They didn't see that megapixel tiny image camera could grow exponentially to provide high-resolution images. They completely ignored it. And instead of using their dominating market position to corner the digital market, they let the market corner them. You know, the turnover happens very, very fast. Eastman Kodak Company became a zombie corporation. You know, if you look about it, there's a lot of talk today about productivity limiting growth. Excuse me. The haze is getting to my throat. There's a lot of talk about productivity limiting growth in the world, especially in America. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about productivity and the slowdown of productivity, and it's limiting GDP because productivity is necessary to continue to grow the economy. But The Economist points out The world has a lot of zombie companies. Eastman Kodak, of course, is gone, but a lot of these zombie companies continue to operating despite poor performance. The International Bank of Settlements estimates that by 2015, 10.5% of the world's companies were zombie corporations, up from less than 6% in 2007. And The Economist, and it's my opinion they're right, thinks the sooner those companies can be gone, the better. It takes a long time. It takes a real problem to shut down a company that has 140,000 employees. Think about that. 140,000 employees. You have benefits build up. You have health care. You have pensions. You have all that goes into employing 140,000 people. And yet, the corporation's dying. McKinsey & Company did a study in which they said, and this is go back to 2007, it's already 10 years old. They said in the 30 years prior to 2007, between that period of time, the leading companies and industries were changing 3 times as fast, which meant more zombie corporations were being made. You know, if you look, I talked about coal mining and the climate change. Coal mining is one of those industries which is slowly dying. Solar is growing and now employs twice as many people as the coal mines do. And that's continuing to grow. I don't do international investing. I stick with the U.S. companies. But if you look at the zombie corporations in the world, Greece, the companies in Greece, 28% are zombie corporations. Italy has 19% of their companies that are zombies. Spain, 16%. There's a reason to focus on the U.S., but there's also a reason to think about and be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. Eastman Kodak had a market cap of $28 billion. That means shareholders owned $28 billion worth of their stock. Today, that stock is worth zero. Zero. You know, it's important to be ahead of the curve instead of behind the curve. It's important to understand what's going on in the world, in the industries, and to avoid those companies which are becoming zombie corporations. You know, those companies are dead money. They're worse than dead money. Dead money just sits there. These are corporations where the money is going to be lost. It's important to be ahead of the curve, not behind the curve. That's the focus of this program. Hopefully you're learning something. Hopefully we're learning where to go and what to go and what's on the horizon and where we should be focused with our investments. That wraps it up for today. Have a very good week, a very good weekend, and I will be back next week to talk more about money.
You've been listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you want Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. That's AdamsFinancialConcepts.com. The information shared on the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again for more About Money with Mike Adams here on Business Radio 1300 KKOL.
The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Creating and maintaining wealth has been the specialty of Adams Financial Concepts for over 20 years. Every portfolio managed by Adams Financial Concepts is customized to fit each particular client's objectives and risk tolerance. The client's interest always comes first in portfolio decisions. Call Mike Adams today at 206-903-1019 or log on to adamsfinancialconcepts.com to check out their AFC performance. They welcome your review. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The following program sponsored by Adams Financial